concept of a new world order has been around for centuries. It's been receiving tremendous play over the last half of the 20th century. George Bush, the first senior president, George Bush, used it a lot in his speeches and really implies that he really wants to see a order in which we have a universal or a global type of governance in which every human being on planet Earth is ultimately responsible to policies that are being formulated at the international level.
It is a big idea, a new world order.
It's really always the same. You go back throughout all of history, the Roman Empire, the Soviet Union, Hitler during the Nazism was always saying that it's going to create the utopia for the average person, when in fact, history always shows that it does exactly the opposite.
Congressman Louis McFadden also expressed the truth after the passage of the bill. A world banking system was being set up here, a superstate controlled by international bankers, acting together to enslave the world for their own pleasure. The Fed has usurped the government. Now, the public was told that the Federal Reserve System was an economic stabilizer, and inflation and economic crises were a thing of the past. Well, as history has shown, nothing is further from the truth. The fact is, the international bankers now had a streamlined machine to expand their personal ambitions. And at the end of 1933, the gold standard was abolished. If you look at a dollar bill from before 1933, it says it is redeemable in gold. You look at a dollar bill today, it says it is legal tender, which means it is backed by absolutely nothing. It is worthless paper. The only thing that gives our money value is how much of it is in circulation. Therefore, the power to regulate the money supply is also the power to regulate its value, which is also the power to bring entire economies and societies to its knees.
They create money out of nothing. What a scam. They have so much money, they don't care about money. All they care about is power. All they care about is being able to control the political situation so it goes their way.
After a man has far more money than he possibly can spend for pleasures, what is left to excite him? For those with a ruling class mentality, the answer is power, raw power over other human beings. Money can buy such power only to a point. Beyond that, politics is the sport, and world politics is the ultimate game.
I believe, first of all, that we now need nothing short of a world constitution for the global financial system.
This is a global economic crisis. All they're doing, country after country, is dumping money into the problem, and it's all falling on the taxpayers' back.
This is a familiar story. In the post-war era, post-World War II era, we faced a slightly different set of challenges. As the global economy reemerged from the destructions of war, we knew that institutions and rules were needed to navigate through this new world order. And because our parents and grandparents were wise and because they were committed, we did what we've always done best. We exercised our global leadership. We were the driving force behind the creation of the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, as well as the GATT, as well as the World Trade Organization, the architecture for the global economic system. In terms of the globalization of the world economy, in terms of the rules of the road, or the lack of the rules of the road, in terms of watching emerging nations trying to figure out where they fit and how we fit relative to them, and so on. And so these institutions, that the affirmative task we have now is to actually create a new world order, because the global order is changing again. And the institutions and the rules that worked so well in the post-World War II era for decades, they need to be strengthened, and some have to be changed. So we have to do what we do best. We have to lead. We have to lead. We have to update the global rules of the road. We have to do it in a way that maximizes benefits for everyone, because obviously it's overwhelmingly in our interest. This is not a zero-sum game. It's overwhelmingly in our interest that China prosper, that Mongolia prosper, that nations big and large, East and West, in Latin America and in Africa prosper. Because, you know that old expression, they asked Willie Sutton why he robbed banks. He said, that's where the money is. We want everybody to have a little money to make sure they can buy. That's the paradox of this new global order. So much of our success depends on the success of those with whom we compete. That's the challenge the President and I and the entire administration take very seriously. It's been the center of our economic philosophy from the day we took office. Because everybody has to understand, you want to play on the world stage, you got to play by the rules.
His fleet of a guided missile destroyer, a guided missile escort ship, a multi-purpose supply ship, and a medical ship left port on Monday. China is also sending 2 helicopters, a team of divers, and a special forces unit for a total of 1,100 military personnel. Their destination is Guam, where they will meet the ships from the U.S., Singapore, and Brunei and head together to the drill venue in Hawaii. The exercise will run until August the 1st, and more than 20 nations are expected to participate. The Chinese Navy will join in cannon firing, maritime security actions, and maritime warship exercises. There will also be military medicine exchange, humanitarian aid, and disaster reduction exercises, as well as diving drills. RIMPAC was started in 1971 and is held every 2 years, led by the U.S.
The advancing market of biometrics, technology that uses physiological and behavioral recognition to identify people. A system touted as a national security necessity is being used to build a database where the biometric identity of millions of Americans will be gathered and stored.
We really need to attack this in a comprehensive kind of way, not some knee-jerk reaction like sticking something in someone's finger to verify who they are.
We've heard about the NSA spying on us all and think, no big deal. I'm not a terrorist, so I have nothing to worry about. Think again, because we are all potential terrorists according to the American government.
You can't just do these kind of things, and this one is not only repealing the principles of liberty, but it's destroying the Constitution.
All of these invasions of our personal privacy under the guise of protecting us, they're just wrong, and it's no longer about keeping us safe. This is about keeping us safely under the government's eye, and it is clear the government is watching all the time.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
Close your window. Go back inside your house.
Go back inside right now. I am inside.
We have a real chance at this new world order. An order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
After 1989, President Bush said, and it was a phrase that I often use myself, that we needed a new world order, and instead it looks like we got a lot of disorder.
It's been a long time coming because of what we did on this day. At this defining moment, change has come to America.
President Obama and British Prime Minister Gordon today calling for a new world order to tackle our global economic crisis.
The affirmative task we have now is to actually create a new world order.
Its task will be to develop an overall strategy for America in this period when really a new world order can be created. It's a great opportunity.
Over the last 2 years, journalists and activists have been fighting something called the National Defense Authorization Act, or the NDAA, specifically Sections 1021 and 1022. These small provisions give the U.S. military the right to indefinitely detain U.S. citizens anywhere in the world, including right here in America. Critics argue that the law's vague language could give the U.S. government the ability to label anyone a threat to national security for simply exercising their First Amendment rights. As a result of the law's dangerous potential, a group of people, including journalist Chris Hedges, whistleblower Daniel Ellsberg, and Dr. Noam Chomsky, sued Obama and were set to bring their case all the way to the Supreme Court. But many were devastated to see that the highest court in the land decided not to hear the case, cementing yet another massive erosion of the constitutional rights of Americans. Although the corporate media has been largely silent on the issue, people have been mobilizing on a grassroots level to bring awareness and fight the NDAA on a local level. I'm joined now by such activist Dan Johnson, founder of PANDA, or the People Against the NDAA. What's going on, Dan?
Nice to have me on the show.
Thank you so much, Dan. We're coming up on the anniversary of habeas corpus signed into law in England, abolishing the imprisonment without trial for people. Why are we regressing 400 years here?
Well, you see, governments throughout history have always placed this enemy. For example, you have in Nazi Germany, you had communism. Hitler always blamed the communists on everything. And today we have terrorism. Today we have this ambiguous enemy that nobody really knows where it is or who they are, but we're going after them with everything, and as is the case in an endless war, the rights at home are taken away. And that's why we're losing habeas corpus, that's why we're losing the right to the trial, is because we have this enemy out there somewhere in the abyss, and we're going to do whatever we can to fight it, regardless of what the Constitution says in this country.
Quite unfortunate, Dan. And as I mentioned, the Supreme Court's declined to hear the case. Really unfortunate there. Chris Hedges actually has a really interesting reason why he thinks the Obama administration has been so vehemently and adamant trying to maintain the ruling. He says since they were so aggressive, it means that if they were using it, as we expect, they could be held in contempt of court. It means that U.S. citizens, probably dual nationals, are being held in military detention facilities, almost certainly overseas, and maybe here at home. Do you agree with his assessment here?
Absolutely, and his assessment comes from when Judge Catherine Forrest of the Southern District Court of New York was asked, are you using these detention provisions of the NDAA in violation of my injunction? And when she was asked that, she asked the government this question, and the government refused to answer. Now, if you have a kid and you say, well, were you in the cookie jar? And he kind of goes, not really sure. It was probably in the cookie jar. And that's why we say the government's probably holding people right now under the detention provisions of the National Defense Authorization Act.
And Dan, you're 20 years old. What do you say to people who say, oh, you're so young and naive. Once you grow up and see how broken the world is, you'll stop caring about it. I mean, how did you get into this fight?
See, since when does age ever matter? See, I got into this fight, actually, I saw a YouTube video. I was procrastinating homework like most college students do. And I saw a YouTube video online called 61 Senators Betrayed You Today. When I came across this YouTube video, I grew up homeschooled. I grew up studying the rise and fall of the Third Reich, the rise and fall of Imperial Japan before Commodore Perry went over there. And what I saw is history repeating itself. And today we have youth all across America because of the internet, because of the freedom we've had in this country before, who are saying, you know what? Government propaganda, what the government is telling us, that really isn't always the truth, and we have the internet to tell us a different side of the story. And so my generation is paying attention. They are out there moving. And what I say to people who say, well, you're too young, anybody's too young to do this, is you're pushing my generation away. What I learned was they bring you in, and they only want your vote. They want you to get involved in politics, but they only want your vote. They want you to sit back down and go home. You're the next generation. Don't sit back down and go home.
Well said. You're wise beyond your years. Let's talk about solutions here. What's the Take Back campaign all about, and what cities have already blocked the NDAA?
So absolutely. We launched the Take Back campaign back in October 2013 as PANDA. And we decided we're going to put all the information, all the resources up for anyone to use anywhere. They don't have to sign up for an email list. They don't have to go anywhere but our website to get these resources. And we're going to say, Congress, today, Congress shot down the Smith-Brown amendment saying, oh yeah, we like indefinite detention. Congress is not going to fix this. Supreme Court denied the law. So the Supreme Court's not going to fix this. And every local official takes an oath to the Constitution. They must stand up for that oath. If they took an oath to the Constitution, they have to uphold it. They have to defend it. So the Take Back campaign is giving people all across America the tools to go after the NDAA's detention provisions on a local level. The first city to do this, the capital of New York, Albany, October 9th, 2013. 5 cities since then, and today we haven't even had a chance to put out the press release, but I'm announcing on RT today we have a 6th city, that's Rutland, Massachusetts, that has banned the NDAA and said that if any of our enforcers utilize it, they'll be fired.
This not only attacks your First Amendment rights, it attacks your Fifth Amendment rights, your due process clause, because this gives not the U.S. government but the U.S. military the right to detain you and indefinitely with no due process.
A controversial bill resurfacing in Congress. The FEMA camp bill allows the government to run at least 6 military installations when a national emergency is declared. These emergency centers would be run by FEMA under the command of the Secretary of Homeland Security. And a few years ago, a similar bill was presented in Congress, but it didn't go anywhere over concerns that the broad language can lead to sweeping, unchecked government power. Now, another version is back up for debate, and Bob English, a civil liberties activist and blogger, joins us now for more. Welcome there, Mr. English.
Hello.
So it didn't pass the first time around. No. Why was there resistance to it?
Well, a fellow by the name of Lee Rogers began writing about it and raising some alarms, concern over the broad sweeping powers it would give the Department of Homeland Security, and it kind of caught fire and just died.
It just died because people were afraid of what this could lead to.
Exactly. There were concerns that there were parallels to the Japanese internment facilities in World War II that we saw, and for practical purposes, the financial mess was going on, and there were other things to be dealt with at the time.
Okay, so there were concerns over the vague language. It didn't pass. Now there's this new version of the bill. What's changed?
Well, they took out the vague language so that the centers are specifically set up to house, shelter, even educate people for extended periods of time, but they are limited to that specific purpose.
Okay, so of course this legislation is meant to be enacted in the event of an emergency. Right. But what exactly does that mean? What is the definition of emergency, especially when it comes to this legislation? When would it be enacted?
Sure. We have to go back to 1988 to the Stafford Act bill to actually get the definition of emergency, and this covers things like tornadoes, floods, hurricanes, natural disasters, but it also gives the president to declare an emergency to avert a catastrophe, which raises the issue of preemptiveness.
Okay, but this also, this is, the goal here is to mobilize resources to have this plan to prevent a tragedy from happening, but also a reaction to it, right?
Yes, a reaction, and that's where some of the concerns for civil liberties activists comes in, because it's a slippery slope. Once the government has this power and all these centers are set up, and it's at least 6, maybe more, probably more, there is a real potential for the abuse of power here.
Okay, interesting. You know, we have this map that shows how the U.S. would be divided in the event of an emergency, if we can pull that up there. There it is. So this is how the U.S. will be divided into districts. You see 10 of them there. This is according to the National Emergency Center establishment. Can you describe what this map is? What exactly does that mean? I mean, it doesn't really make sense in terms of states as we know them. What is this classification system? Sure. What are the purposes?
It doesn't look like the map that you and I saw in elementary school.
Not at all.
Effectively, the U.S. has been cordoned off into these different districts. And so these new emergency centers will be spread out throughout the United States in most of these eventually. And it gives FEMA and the Department of Homeland Security jurisdiction over what goes on in these places during a time of emergency.
Okay, I want to go into because this act does make some specific examples, some exclusions, set some limitations, I should say. So the National Emergency Center Establishment Act, what it does not do, it does not authorize any federal officer or employee to force an individual to enter a national emergency center or prevent an individual from leaving a national emergency center. So, Bob, it looks to me like there are some safeguards there. If you don't like it, you can leave.
Well, I'd like to think so. And this was actually one of the other things that was changed in this new version of the bill. They added this. But if you read what they're saying, you know, federal officer or federal employee, that doesn't cover members of the military. And since these are going to be installed in decommissioned and existing military bases, you're going to have people from the military there. So I would think they will have people, namely in the military, who would be able to force people to stay there or prevent them from leaving if that is what they want to do.
In assisting the feds coming into states and going into homes and taking everybody's gun away. And I said, I would not be a part of something like that. And I said, one of the reasons is I wouldn't want to get shot, because the American people are only going to put up with so much before they push back. And I said, if the feds tried to do that, disarm this country, I said, you would see an uprising and maybe a version of the Second American Revolution.
We've chosen to believe in each other. Today we face the monsters that are at our door.
The U.S. Department of Homeland Security has been buying up massive amounts of ammunition. Americans are wondering why.
Do you think this is a sign that they're preparing for some sort of mass civil unrest?
If you look at what the Department of Homeland Security has been purchasing over the last year, it comes out to like 1.6 billion rounds of ammunition, more than 7,000 fully automatic assault weapons, 2,700 MRAP type vehicles, and now drones. Those are instruments of war. Department of Homeland Security's, who are they going to fight a war against?
Why have they bought now more than 2 billion bullets, all kinds of arms and ammunition, and now more than 2,700 tanks to patrol in America and keep order? We're told it's to keep the peace and to increase safety. But of course, we also know from Army documents, from Homeland Security reports, and a lot of other information that it's really to occupy America and prepare for a civil unrest and a total economic collapse that will include gun confiscation.
The rise of the warrior cop. So, what do you mean?
Our cops are getting increasingly like soldiers. They're being dressed like soldiers, they're being armed like soldiers, they're sent out in the streets told they're fighting a war. And when you do that, we shouldn't be surprised when we see some of the results we've seen at the lead-in, where they start treating American citizens more like enemy combatants than citizens with rights.
Meaning, mostly you're talking about these SWAT team raids.
Over the last probably 20 years, there's been about a 1,500% increase in the number of SWAT raids in the U.S.
Often is 10 or 20 guys dressed in black, heavily armed.
I mean, they look like a military squad. I mean, they look like a unit that would invade a village in Iraq looking for insurgents.
Speaking of the police state, which 9/11 ushered in, a 16-year-old is questioned by FBI officials over a YouTube video that he uploaded. According to Justin Hallman, a 16-year-old, after having uploaded a YouTube video which highlighted how America was slipping into a police state, he was visited by FBI officials.
Police state.
Ask one of them why they're here.
What's up, nigga? Police state. Police state, right? Police state. 4th of July. Here's our video. M16s.
Because we don't live in a police state, sir. Martial law has not been established in this country.
The door, sir.
He's got his hand up.
You're gonna kick my door. You kicked my door down. You kicked my door down.
Get on the ground.
You kicked my door down.
Yes, we did. Get on the ground.
No, you have no right to be in here. You have no right to be in here. You have no right to be here. You have no right to be in here. Do not touch her. You are assaulting her.
Yeah, I didn't open up the door. I would open up. Now they're barging in my door for one reason.
Down, grab it down. Down to your hands. Hands, come to me. Ow. Don't move. Don't move.
If what we saw in response to bombs was that, what will the response be in the wake of something bigger? Is that when we'll see martial law take effect across the country? And more importantly, will people just accept it entirely out of fear?
It was never meant that we would have this gigantic police force from the federal government. I mean, we had martial law up there. FBI and all these agents coming in and closing things down, going to people's houses.
I think it could very well come to that based on the things that are happening in the news, and we're seeing, the collapse of our economy, so many different things happening.
I have spoken with one federal agent, and the information succinctly boiled down is this. There is an event coming, Steve, in the very near-term future that is going to affect the United States of America to its very soul. that what is being planned as you and I are on the air tonight, and what has been coming together into that old term, the perfect storm, is literally brewing right over our heads. It is and includes military maneuvers in the United States, military actions that are forthcoming, and that will be so deep and so penetrating that the United States will never be the same.
Heavy artillery rocked downtown Tampa today as military gunships and helicopters roared by the convention center. Now, this was all part of the annual Special Forces Operations Convention. While it wasn't a real invasion, Chris Trankman says it looked about as real as it could get.
This was different. This was a first for me. Usually no one sees what we do.
The display featured Apache helicopters speeding overhead, while bigger Black Hawk choppers carried highly trained operatives as part of a make-believe invasion.
In the distance, they must travel to the target.
The spectacle rivals any show.
Which passages of Scripture should guide our public policy? Should we go with Leviticus, which suggests slavery is okay? Or we could go with Deuteronomy, which suggests stoning your child if he strays from the faith? Or should we just stick to the Sermon on the Mount, a passage that is so radical that it's doubtful that our own Defense Department would survive its application? Folks haven't been reading their Bible. I congratulate you on taking your place on the long gray line. But the world is changing with accelerating speed. This presents opportunity, but also new dangers. It will be your generation's task to respond to this new world. We meet here at a moment of testing for Europe and the United States, and for the international order that we have worked for generations to build.
Ukraine has entered a trade agreement with the EU, the very deal that started events that saw the previous administration toppled and ultimately led to the ongoing bloody standoff in the country's east. President Petro Poroshenko signed the association pact in Brussels and says that he believes this is the way to carry out the will of the nation.
The people demanding European future, very clear. Every single region of Ukraine support one candidate, demonstrating we are ready for reform, we are ready for Europe, we are ready for peace.
But in eastern Ukraine, there appears to be little support for Kiev. The self-proclaimed republics of Donetsk and Lugansk, with a population of more than 6 million, are refusing to recognize the new leaders and are openly critical of their European ambitions. More than 350 people have been killed, 257 of them civilians, since Kiev launched its military operation against the defiant eastern regions. But President Poroshenko is determined to set course for Europe. So let's see why aligning with the EU appears so attractive for Kiev and where the possible catches could lie. Well, the deal will remove tariffs on almost all goods traded between Ukraine and Europe. That is, of course, if it meets EU standards, which it doesn't at the moment, and will have to spend about $100 billion in order to do so. Winning a place at the European table, Ukraine will no longer be Russia's preferential partner and will lose $500 billion in trade. Global financial markets expert Patrick Young believes the association deal with the EU is a grave mistake.
Ukraine, which last year was in a catastrophic position had it signed a free trade association, this year is going to associate with the European Union at the point when it's on the brink already of economic disaster. This is a catastrophic move for the Ukrainian economy. The only winners out of this are a few sadly deluded egos, whether they're in Brussels, whether they're in Washington, who believe somehow or other they've achieved a great geopolitical victory. For the people of Ukraine, There are no jobs to be had here. There's only going to be job losses. There is no economic growth to be had by suddenly having Western European goods dumped at low cost onto your marketplace. This deal is a disaster. It's a very, very tragic day for the people of Ukraine who want to improve their economic outlook.
Well, those in Ukraine supporting the association agreement with the EU have high hopes for the deal. But not everything pro-European Ukrainians are hoping for is on the table right now. Although Brussels promises Ukraine to establish visa-free travel, that's not actually mentioned in the association agreement. The freedom of employment within the EU is only for member states, and there is no actual guarantee of eventual EU.
The extremist group called the Islamic State of Iraq and al-Sham, also known as ISIS, released several videos and an audio message outlining its new self-proclaimed authority. The first video is called Breaking the Borders, and it purports to show short speeches delivered by ISIS leaders at a border crossing between Iraq and Syria. The second shows an ISIS fighter speaking in English and giving a tour of a destroyed Iraqi border outpost. He then raises an ISIS flag. They said ISIS was demanding allegiance from not only other jihadist groups, but from all Muslims. And it said it was establishing a caliphate or holy state.
Government forces and the opposition are going at each other in several deadly hotspots around the globe tonight. Government forces are advancing in Syria, a public showdown in Venezuela, new gun battles in Thailand, but we begin in Ukraine.
The crisis in Ukraine is turning deadlier by the minute. Thailand and Venezuela also brought to the brink by major demonstrations and protests. Is this the kind of event that could lead to something far worse?
Yes, I think what it boils down to is that you have very large populations that haven't participated in the economic recovery.
What Russia is doing now in Ukraine violates the principles of the United Nations Charter. It threatens peace and security in Europe. Russia must stop its military activities and its threats.
A two-state solution to the Middle East peace process may have grown dimmer today. Correspondent Doug McKelway on the unfortunate timing of a visit by one of America's strongest allies.
A vigorous handshake, warm greetings, and an expression of hope for Mideast peace seem designed to tamp down reports of a prickly relationship between President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu.
It's my belief that ultimately it is still possible to create two states, a Jewish state of Israel and a state of Palestine, in which people are living side by side in peace and security. The Israeli Prime Minister says the international community should not recognize the emerging Palestinian unity government. Benjamin Netanyahu says unity government's ties with Hamas will have a detrimental effect on peace.
Hamas is a terror organization calling for the destruction of Israel. The international community should not embrace this government. It will not strengthen peace. It will strengthen terrorism.
Netanyahu also called the Palestinian resistance movement Hamas a terrorist organization. He rejected the Palestinian offer to use the Hamas-backed unity government as a means to pursue peace, in a move aimed at ending a 7-year rift between the Palestinian movements Fatah and Hamas. Repeated attempts at reconciliation between the two have failed in the past, but both Palestinian factions now seem to be on the path to finally mend the fences. Israeli warplanes have once again targeted the Gaza Strip. We were earlier joined by Press TV's correspondent Ashraf Shannon. He gave us more details about the attack.
Around dawn, an Israeli warplane fired at least one rocket towards a Hamas security post east of the Gaza City neighborhood of Zaytun. That location caught fire. Israel might carry out more airstrikes, especially that there is heavy presence of Israeli fighter jets and helicopter gunships in the skies of Gaza.
There have been some amazing, significant prophetic things that have happened.
Yes, these tetrads, or these 4 moons, total eclipses of them, happen rarely, but last century they happened twice. 1967 and 1968, when Jerusalem was recaptured on Passover and Tabernacles, and then again right after Israel became a nation in 1948. It happened in 1949 and 1950. So I thought, oh my gosh, this is tied to Israel. And so I looked in the 1800s, there weren't any. 1700s, there weren't any. 1600s, there weren't any. In the 1500s, there were like 4 or 5 times, but none of them fell on the feast days. And then in the 1492 is when all the Jews were kicked out of Spain. And in 1493 and 1494, the same thing. And so I thought, wow, 2014 and 2015 looks like it's to be pretty significant.
You must wake up now or be enslaved. The war has begun many years ago. The war was declared by our enemies upon us. You had better listen.
Many of us Christians are not afraid to be thrown into prison because we realize that we are free in Christ no matter where we are, and they are the slaves, no matter where they are, because they're slaves to sin.